We welcome you all for this session on GST e-Invoicing, procedural and legal compliances. The session is organized under the aegis of Indirect Taxes Expert Committee of BCIC. On behalf of the Chamber, we express our sincere thanks to Mr. Siddeshwar Elmali, who is the partner, Singvi Dev and Uni LLP, and Ms. Sonal Jain, partner, Mystery and Shah LLP, for accepting our invitation to address on the legal and tech perspective. We also we thanks Mr. Mukesh Shah, who is the partner, NNMS and Co, and who is the member of Indirect Tax Expert Committee, for moderating the session. The Chamber also acknowledges the support of our member companies, Mrs. MTR, Fundermax, Bueller, and Sona Group, for their sponsorship towards the annual events. I now request Mr. Mukesh Shah to set the context and take it over from here. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupa. Good afternoon and welcome to the today's webinar. Thanks for joining from your busy schedule on a weekday. Today's topic is a buzzword, e-invoice. Since GST's inception, it is now almost, we are entering into the 5th year of the GST law. The journey has been quite challenging, and there are issues from both the sides, department as well as from taxpayers' point of view. But what we have seen is the GST law, unlike the previous regime, is a e-enabled environment. It is moving towards an e-enabled environment. And apart from e-way bill, the e-invoice is a transformational reform. The government wants to achieve certain objective through this mechanism. What I can just mention here is that this is a non-intrusive mechanism, and it intends to be a user-friendly mechanism by which government wants to achieve certain important aspects like menace of the fraudulent invoices. They want to mitigate that risk. At the same time, on a real-time basis, flow of input tax credit also they want to achieve. That's what I can see from the law, the way it is drafted in the policy. So before I go into before we go into the legal and technical aspect of the e-way bill, we have to just keep in our mind that e-invoice is here to stay, and the quicker we adopt it, the quicker we make our processes in compliance with the law, the better for us. Because we have seen in last less than 2 years, the e-invoice threshold has been reduced by authorities from 500 crores to 100 crores and from 100 crores to 50 crores last year. And now with effect from 1st of April 2020, whoever is having aggregate turnover in any of the preceding financial year exceeding 20 crores is mandated to follow the e-invoice procedures. So I would like to hand over this session and quickly start on the legal aspect of the e-invoice and technical aspect of the e-invoice. And I would request every member also to participate actively and take out of this session whatever assistance you can get. And thanks to BCIC for conducting this webinar. So over to Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Mukesh. I now invite Mr. Siddeshwar Elmali, partner, Singvi Dev and Uni LLP, to present, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupa. Thank you, Mukesh, for the brief back about the subject. And I would like to thank BCIC for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on e-invoicing. As Mukesh aptly put, saying that e-invoice is going to stay and we have to adapt to this. To set this context, if you go to the earlier times, since the VAT law was introduced, they introduced first filing of returns online, then even service tax returns was introduced online. Then there was a fear among all the taxpayers, how user friendly it can be for filing the returns. Then they got adapted to that particular technology. Then slowly that department in the state of Karnataka moved to EU pass, where supplier had to upload all the purchase, supplier making sales had to upload all the sales, and it used to come in the registers of the purchasing person. Then even e-way bill, which was earlier 505 and 515, a manual format, turned into e-way bill. And when GST got introduced, everything was online. And even the way the e-way bill was introduced, it was done online. Then when e-invoice was brought in, as Mukesh mentioned, first they put the threshold limit of 500 crores and above. Then slowly they started reducing the turnover. Now, as the business got adapted and as the platform started getting stabilized, they started reducing the turnover so that people will not have to complain that the system is not platform is not working well and all that. They tested the systems for bigger turnover people. Once the system got stabilized, they introduced this concept of e-invoicing. Now with effect of 1st April 2022, it is mandatory for uh, persons, registered persons having aggregate turnover over and above 20 crores. So in this context, I would like to start my discussion on the legal aspect. I will share my PPT. Is it visible?
It's visible, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So what are the nature of documents which are generally required in case of movement of goods or provision of services or any other documents where the discussions are happening time and again for what type of documents e-invoice is required or not? So what are the documents which are issued for movement of goods or providing services which are taxable? A tax invoice is required to be issued under section 31, read with rule 36, and now rule 48 will come in discussion as we move forward. And this tax invoice is required to be issued. I'm talking about a regular tax invoice. I'm not still coming into e-invoice. A regular tax invoice which a registered person is required to issue. It will be for a B2B also or for B2C also. Then in case there are any transactions after issuing the tax invoice, a person has supplied the goods, but goods have been returned, or the taxable value is more than what was mentioned in the invoice earlier, or the tax amount has been mentioned erroneously, higher value. So in that context, the registered person can issue credit notes in terms of section 34(1), but there is a time limit prescribed for that. As of the time limit currently is of September. In the finance bill, they have moved it to November. So credit notes can be issued in case of B2B invoices and B2C invoices. Then in case of any supplies where the taxable value have been mentioned at a lesser rate, or even the tax amount has been mentioned at a lesser amount, the registered person can issue a debit note in terms of section 34(3) also. And these debit notes can be issued in case of B2B supplies or B2C supplies. And in case of exempt supplies or in case of supply by a composition dealer, a bill of supply is required to be issued, and these are issued for B2B supplies as well as B2C supplies. And there is one more aspect where a invoice cum bill of supply can be issued. That is for a taxable supply as well as an exempt supply can be issued by a registered person to an unregistered person. Please note that this invoice cum bill of supply can be issued by a registered person to an unregistered person, that is B2C only. And there is one more aspect called input service distributor invoice. This is not for any not for a supply, but a person who receives the invoices of services, say in the head office, and those invoices, the services have been provided by the service provider to various locations in different states. So a person who is registered under ISD is required to distribute the taxes by way of issuing of input service distributor invoice in terms of rule 54. So this ISD invoice has nothing to do with the supplies as such, but the credits which are to be required to be transferred by a ISD distributor. So with these types of documents which are prescribed, we will understand in which context e-invoice is to be issued and in which context e-invoice should not be issued and when a registered person is required to issue the e-invoice. So before going into the nature of transactions, let us understand where is the power to notify e-invoices. How did this e-invoice got prescribed and how was it notified? So it should move from the sections and rules as required. Now, I require all your attention on this particular section 31.1, which mentions that a registered person supplying taxable goods on or before removal of goods or delivery of goods to issue a tax invoice containing particulars as prescribed. So what are the contents of an invoice is prescribed in Rule 46. And in case of Rule 54, it prescribes for a special category of persons what are the contents of an invoice in case of an input service distributor, in case of insurance, in case of GTA, goods transport agency service providers, and in case of multiplex cinema screen. So first part says it should contain particulars prescribed and in a manner prescribed for categories of goods or supplies. This is a proviso in section 31.1 in the context of goods. So does 38.4 come under this rule 38.4, which issues a condition for issuance of e-invoice? Does this 31.1 proviso cover this aspect in the manner prescribed for category of goods or supplies? Now, if you go to rule 38.4, it says to notify class of registered persons to obtain an invoice reference number from the common portal. So now the proviso to 31.1 says in a manner prescribed for category of goods or supplies, whereas 48.4 rule mentions class of registered persons. So category of goods and class of registered persons are not one and the same. So do you think that 48.4 is in terms of section 31? Let us discuss on this aspect. Even if you open rule 48, it does not give reference to any section. Unlike if you go to section rule 46, it says subject to section 54, a tax invoice under section 31. So a tax invoice which has to be issued containing the prescribed particulars, the prescription in rule 46 gives a reference to section 31. But in rule 48, if you see the rules, it doesn't give reference to any section. So does this mean how has the government issued this particular notification? Is the power taken under section 164? So when this particular notification was issued, it was issued in section 164 in terms of notification 68 of 2019, dated 31/12/2019, while CGST 8 amendment rules 2019, where this particular rule, rule 48.4, 5 and 6 was inserted by way of this notification drawing powers under section 164. So the powers which has been taken by the government to notify e-invoices comes from this amendment which has been made under notification 68. Keep this particular aspect in mind about to notify class of registered person in respect of an invoice. When we come to credit note and debit note, there will be several questions. I will deal with that as it comes. So even if you go to section 31.2, which is in relation to taxable supply of services, here also it mentions contains prescribed particulars in terms of rule 46 or 54, we have to refer, and in a manner prescribed for categories. So here also in for services, it mentions categories of services. So even for the purpose of issuing a e-invoice under Rule 48, the powers have been taken in terms of Section 164. Now, if we go to notification 13 of 2020, which issued notification notifying class of registered person, notification starts in terms of powers under Rule 48.4. So first, the powers for Rule 48.4 was drawn in terms of Section 164, and the notification 13 of 2020 as amended from time to time has been issued in terms of Rule 48.4. So this is the background of how e-invoice notifications have been issued. This is the background of the power to issue the e-invoice provisions under the GST Act. As Mukesh gave a brief background of how the turnovers were prescribed, this is just a summary of that. More than 500 crores, it was effective from 110 to 2020. Then more than 100 crores, 1/1/2021. More than 50 crores, it is from 1/4/2021. And more than 20 crores, it will be effective from 1/4/2022. So let's discuss about the applicability of e-invoice. There is a misconception that does e-invoice means generation of e-invoice on GST portal. There are some questions. Does it mean that e-invoice, does it tantamount to raising an invoice from a GST portal? No, it is not. A registered person can continue to issue or create invoices using their own utilities, billing softwares. Say for that they might use their accounting software, say Tally, Oracle, SAP. They can use those softwares to generate the invoices. But only the GST portal requires that the invoices which we are going to generate, those will have to be reported in the invoice registration portal to generate the invoice reference number. So once you feed the particular details of the contents which are required to be provided in the IRP, invoice reference number will be generated, and this invoice reference number will also give a QR code, and this IRN and QR code will have to be embedded in the invoice which is going to be issued, the invoices which are going to be issued by the supplier. QR code will have an embedded IRN. So separate mention of IRN is not required if the where the QR code is required. I mean to say the QR code is required to be mandatorily displayed on the invoice, and IRN number as a option, it is better to mention that also. There's no harm on that. And both these things have to be embedded on the on the invoice. So this obtaining of IRN from the portal is what is generally called as e-invoice in the common parlance. As such, it is not generating an invoice on the GST portal. Hope we are clear on this aspect. Next is, what is an IRN? An IRN is a 64-character length hash generated from the GST portal, and it has various combinations which will capture document type, document number, financial year. Please note that the IRN number is not an invoice number. I am repeating time and again, it is not an invoice number. Invoice number which are required to be issued by the supplier in terms of Rule 46 will have to be continue to be mentioned on the invoice. So the last line which you are seeing on the slide, this is typically how a IRN number will look when you generate it from the GST portal. Now, coming to the aspect of the aggregate turnover, what the notification mentions is currently, which is effective from 1/4/2022, every registered person whose aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 20 crore in any preceding financial year from 2017-18 onwards. So what is aggregate turnover? I'll discuss in the ensuing slides. It says a registered person whose aggregate turnover exceeds 20 crore in preceding financial year from 2017-18 onwards. So in any of the financial year, say 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, 21 or 22, in any of these 1 year, if your turnover has exceeded 20 crore, then from financial year effective from 1st April 2022, a registered person will have to comply with this e-invoice requirement. And there is no exception to SEZ developers. SEZ developers also are required to issue e-invoice. I'm using the word e-invoice because it is used generally, but e-invoice is not a substitute to your invoice, it is only a generation of IRN. Now, there might be a situation from 2017-18 till 2022 March. The turnover of the registered person has not exceeded 20 crore. As of March 22 also, for the past 17, 18 to 22, the turnover has not exceeded 20 crores. So there is no requirement of e-invoice. Now during the financial year 22-23, if the turnover exceeds 20 crores in the middle of the financial year 22-23, say November 22, so will the e-invoice kick in immediately or will it be in a subsequent financial year? Since the notification says in any of the preceding financial year, so in a case your turnover has not exceeded up to March 22 and in 22-23 it exceeds 20 crores in the mid of the financial year, your applicability of e-invoice will be from April 2023. So keep this point as to when the applicability of e-invoice will be there in case of turnovers exceeding 20 crores. Now, there will be a question like, how do I compute this aggregate turnover? What are the turnovers I have to include, exclude for determining this 20 crores? And mind it, where the e-invoice is applicable to a registered person and the invoice is not issued as prescribed in Rule 48.5, then it is not an invoice at all. So what are the consequences of a person not issuing an e-invoice? That is separately dealt with in the separate slide. Just keep this in mind. If a person doesn't issue an invoice as required under Rule 48.5, then it is not an invoice. The consequence we will discuss. So how do I compute the aggregate turnover of 20 crores? What are the inclusions? Inclusions in 20 crore under a single PAN, that is a single PAN on all India basis. If I have branches across India and different states, the turnover has to be determined on an all India basis. So what are those which I have to include? Taxable outward supplies. So if I make even a stock transfer from one state to another state, that also will be included. Job works, when I send it to a job worker, but any taxes which are charged, taxes in the sense only GST, that is CGST, SGST, IGST should not be considered for determining your turnover. Then value of exempt supplies. Value of exempt supplies, if you go to the definition of exempt supplies, it uses the word non-taxable supply also. So what is non-taxable supply? That has also been defined, a supply which is not leviable to tax. So your taxable supplies, your exempt supplies. So what is non-taxable supply? An example can be alcoholic liquor for human consumption, which is currently not leviable to tax, and your petroleum items which are not leviable to tax. So in those turnovers, you have to consider while determining your turnover of 20 crores. Then value of export supplies also you have to consider while determining this aggregate turnover of 20 crores. So you have to consider in total all this and then see whether 20 crore threshold limit has been breached and whether e-invoice is applicable in your case. So what is not to be included is, assuming I'm a registered person and I have some supplies which are liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism. Say I have a supplier who is doing goods transport agency services and I am required to pay taxes under reverse charge mechanism, or an advocate who is providing services which is liable to tax under reverse charge mechanism in my hands. This supply which are liable under reverse charge mechanism, I should not take this into computation for determining the aggregate turnover. Now, which of the supplies e-invoice is applicable? When I make supply of goods or services to a registered person, so it will be applicable for B2B supplies, and it is applicable supplies made by a registered person to an SEC developer. And if a registered person making it, invoice is required to be issued. So all B2B invoices are covered. And even when I make a supply as by way of export, so whether goods or services, e-invoice has to be issued. Then, which of the supplies e-invoice is not applicable? It is not applicable to B2C invoices. That is business to consumers, where it is supply, where supply is made to a person who is not registered. But I'm required to issue e-invoice. In case of invoice is issued to a person who is not registered, e-invoice is not to be raised for such persons by the person who is issuing then who are exempted from issuing e-invoice. Government department, local authority, they have defined what is local authority. You have to check meaning of government department and local authority. To them, it is not applicable. SEZ unit, they are not required to issue e-invoice. It is applicable to SEZ developers. They are required to issue e-invoice, but not SEZ units. Insurers, banking companies, financial institutions, including NBFC, goods transport agencies, service providers, passenger transport service providers, multiplex screens, and other than multiplex screens exhibiting cinematography films, issuing electronic tickets. So if these multiplex screens and other than multiplex screens who are issuing electronic tickets are not required to issue e-invoice. The question is, where is the question of B2B supplies? If there is a bulk booking by any company for the persons to go and watch cinemas, and if they provide a GST and if they are not going to issue e-tickets to them in those circumstances, e-invoice will become applicable. Then it is not applicable to supplies made for exempt supplies. If I make any exempt supplies, I am required to issue a bill of supply and not a tax invoice. So e-invoice is not to be issued in case of bill of supply, that is in case of exempt supply and in case of even a composition dealer. The next one is input service distributor invoice. I have explained what is input service distributor. Even input service distributor are not required to issue a e-invoice because they are distributing the credit to the various GST registrations under the same PAN. Please note that there is a mandatory requirement to print the QR code on the tax invoice, because even if you go to rule 46R of the GST rules, it mentions among all the other contents of a tax invoice where it says name of the supplier, GSTN number, HSN number, quantity, taxable value, taxable rate, recipient GSTN. Among all those contents, mandatory you have to mention the QR code. So if you mention the QR code only, that is when the invoice is a valid e-invoice. Now, next question which will come to everybody's mind is, what are the consequences of non-compliance of an e-invoice? In case of a supplier who does not issue e-invoice, penalty under section 122(3)(e) will be invoked. It says any person who fails to issue invoice in accordance with the provisions of this act or rules there made under shall be liable to a penalty which may extend to 25,000. Now, the question which arises is it a penalty for each invoice that is applicable, or is it a one-time penalty? My view on this is that it uses the word any person. So a person has failed to issue invoice, it will not be for each invoice, but it will be a penalty one time, is my view. But there are different views where they are saying that it will be a for each tax invoice. I think that would not be the case in my view. And there are certain other issues which also came up where people have raised questions that whether penalty under section 122(1)(1), that is not issuing an invoice. I have because e-invoice is if a person issues an invoice which does not have a QR code, will it not be a invoice and say that they can invoke 122(1)(1), where the penalty is again equivalent to tax amount or 10,000, whichever is higher. And one more aspect which may come is when I'm sending the goods along with the e-way bill, whether a person who has not issued an e-invoice, whether even the penalty can be invoked. In this case, my view is that when there is a specific penal provisions under 122(3)(e), the other penalties can't be invoked is my view. But there are different school of thoughts of various other tax experts. Let's see how the tax evolves over a period of time. So what are the consequences of a person who is going to record these invoices, but the invoice as prescribed under Rule 48 has not been issued? What are the consequences in the hands of the recipient? If I have to claim input tax credit, what is the condition prescribed? It under 16(2)(a), it mentions that a person who has to claim input tax credit should be in the possession of a tax invoice. And even Rule 36 says document to claim credit is invoice. So when you go to Rule 48(5), where the e-invoice has been prescribed, it says that an invoice which is not been issued in terms of Rule 48(4) is not an invoice at all. So when it is not an invoice at all, then the recipient, though has an invoice which is not in terms of Rule 48(5), that is an e-invoice, then the input tax credit will be denied. So a person who is receiving goods or services, how can he check the applicability of e-invoice to a supplier? So in this context, if you go to the portal of GST-in, the portal I have mentioned here, if you put the details of GST-in, it will mention that whether the e-invoice is applicable or not. Other aspect which a person as a registered person who is receiving the goods or services can send a declaration to the supplier to check whether e-invoice is applicable or not as a safety measure, and then keep it on a record so that on a later date, if it is found that he had to issue invoice and don't have any e-invoice from him, then we can mention even that declaration to the supplier that if e-invoice was applicable and if you have not complied with the law, then what input tax credit I am not entitled to because of non-compliance from your make this payment. So as a declaration, as a safety measure. But this declaration for you to fight in the eyes of the law, saying that he is given the declaration and I have gone by that, will get difficult. So one is to check in the portal, and even in the portal, what happens is if a person is dealing exclusively in exempted goods and his turnover is about 20 crores, it will show that it is applicable. But if you are a recipient who are obtaining any taxable goods from him, then based on this check, you have to inform the supplier that if you issue a e-invoice only, we will honor the invoices and procure the goods or services. So these are some important checks which you have to do. I think earlier also when the turnover was 500 crores, 100 crores, 50 crores, all these checks have been done by various registered persons while procuring goods or services. So continue that also now, where the turnover is less than 20 crores, where not many registered persons may not be aware, it would be good to take a confirmation or even inform the supplier so that we are compliant on this aspect. Now coming to debit note, credit notes aspect, whether debit note, credit note also requires that invoice reference number and whether a signature is required on the invoice. Now, if you go to this particular rule 48(4), note it uses the word, the phrase used are the invoice. It has not used the word any other document, credit note or debit note. Okay. Now, when you go to section 34, it does not use the phrase manner of issuance of invoice. It uses only the word containing such particulars. I'll just go back to the previous slides where we discussed about applicability of power to notify e-invoice. One is containing particulars and manner prescribed. So when containing particulars is mentioned in section 34 for credit notes, debit notes, but the manner in which it is to be issued, that has not been prescribed. It says containing such particulars only. Now 38.4 does not use the word, rule 48.4 does not use the word credit note, debit note. Section does not, 34 relating to credit note, debit note does not you mention prescribed manner. Now suddenly when you go to notification 13, you see shall prepare invoice and other documents. Suddenly the other documents comes in the notification. So as such, the credit note, debit note, whether it should contain IRN numbers obtaining from the GST portal. As such, if you go by the spirit of the law, it is not there. But to avoid litigations, it is suggested that even for the debit notes, credit notes issued on a B2B, you issue the invoice with the IRN containing the QR code. Even the FAQ issued on the GST portal mentions that e-invoice is in case of debit note, credit note, e-invoice applicability is there for debit notes and credit notes. Why I suggest that the IRN number should be there even in case of debit note, credit note is it is in the interest of the registered person only. When is a credit note issued? When the credit note is issued in case where there is a goods return within the prescribed time or the taxable value or tax amount mentioned is incorrect. So to give effect of the reduction of the amount of tax, which I have to upload in GSTR1 also tomorrow, just to so that we don't have any litigation, long run litigation on this aspect running around pillar to post. It is suggested for credit notes to have the IRN code because I want to take the benefit of reduction of taxes which I had earlier issued it in the tax invoice. Now, why should we have it even in the debit note? So that the recipient who has to claim the credit, he should not face problems going forward. So it is prescribed that even debit note, credit note have this particular IRN number or QR code which is there, so that we don't have any issues on claiming the credit or reduction of tax for credit note, debit notes. In case of what financial credit note, what is a financial credit note? There is no mention of the word financial credit note in the GST Act. What is this term which is used colloquially is, I am required to issue a credit note in terms of conditions mentioned in section 34. So what are the conditions when a person can issue a credit note? A registered person can issue a credit note when there is a goods supplied and the goods have been returned back, or the value of taxable supply or the tax amount mentioned is more than what was required to be mentioned in the tax invoice, or there is a deficiency in providing the supplying the goods or deficiency in services. Only in these conditions issue a credit note, and there's a time prescribed when the credit note has to be issued. So if I issue a credit note beyond the time prescribed of September, then I can't take the benefit of reduction of tax. So in that case, I can issue a financial credit note without taking the benefit of the taxes which I have already passed on to the recipient. In such cases, when I issue a financial credit note, I need not report it in the IRP to get the IRN number. Now, there is a question which is being raised time and again, whether a signature is required on an e-invoice. Let me make a recall of what I made in the earlier slides. I said this IRN number or generating of IRN number or QR code from the GST portal is not an invoice. It is generation of a IRN number. So it is not a substitute of a invoice. The portal provides you to generate an invoice after creating a IRN number. But Rule 48 is a separate provision for generation of an invoice reference number. And now Rule 46 is a separate rule by itself. So if you read Rule 46, clause Q, there it mentions when an invoice is issued, it has to have a signature or a digital signature. So if you are printing the invoice with IRN number QR code, apart from the QR code, which is there embedded on the invoice, a signature would be required. If you are not using a digital signature, a handmade signature would be required. My take is on that. And a digital signature, if it is issued, issue it with a digital signature. And a proviso to the Rule 46 mentions that states that in case where electronic invoice is issued in terms of Information Technology Act 2000, then a signature or digital signature is not required. So it is an electronic invoice issued in terms of IT Act. In those cases, it is not required. But the IRN number which is being generated, that is not, I think, would not suffice that. You will have to put the signature or digital signature. And can you say that QR code invoice, is it an electronic invoice? I think as per me, QR code on an electronic invoice will not tantamount to a invoice under Information Technology Act. Even if you go to FAQ issued on this aspect, there is a question mentioned whether a signature or digital signature is required on the e-invoice. They have just mentioned the answer saying that please refer to Rule 46 and what are the requirements of Rule 46 has to be fulfilled. So they have not answered that generation of a IRN number will suffice. So to avoid any disputes and litigation, it is suggested that a signature on the invoice is to be made to avoid any unwanted penalties and litigations on this aspect. So having dwelt with what are the turnovers when a person is required to issue and who are not required to issue e-invoice, what are the exemptions provided in the notifications for issuance of e-invoice, let us have some discussion on various issues which will be running across in various thoughts in various forums. These have been issued. So first question is, supplier is required to issue e-invoice, but it is not enabled on the portal. Assuming my turnover has reached the threshold limit of 20 crores in March 2022. So the portal is still showing that it is not enabled. Then in case where you are sure that your turnover limit has reached 20 crores, then a request can be made on the portal for enablement of this e-invoice, and that will be enabled once a request is made. Can amendment be made to the invoices reported in IRN once it has been generated? No changes can be made once an IRN has been generated. So once you send the details to the portal and IRN has been generated, no amendments is possible. Then these changes, if you think are required to be made, you can make the changes in the GSTR1 while filing the GSTR1 in the portal. But whatever changes have been made, that will be reported to the proper officer. E-invoice is applicable to invoices issued under the same PAN also. So I have a branch in Tamil Nadu, Delhi, Mumbai, so in the Maharashtra. So what happens is if I'm issuing moving any goods from one state to other state, even in such cases, I am required to issue a e-invoice. That is in case of distinct persons also, e-invoice is required to be issued. Now, while determining the turnover of 20 crores, since the GST Act came in July 2017, whether the turnover I have to take even from April to June. On this aspect, if you go to aggregate turnover that has been defined under Section 2, subsection 6 of the GST Act. So if you have to determine turnover of applicability of 17-18, April to June turnover is not required to be considered for that turnover of 20 crores. And even in the FAQ issued by the GST Act, it says that turnover of should be considered for financial year 17-18 only from 1st July 2017. Now, there might be entities who are registered person under the same PAN who are registered as a SEZ unit also, and they are having registration as a DTA also, domestic tariff area, where they are making supplies and registered separately for a SEZ unit and a unit which is other than SEZ. So whether e-invoicing would be applicable for the DTA unit. For determining the turnover of 20 crores, the turnover of SEZ unit and DTA unit has to be considered for determining the 20 crore turnover limit. But e-invoice will have to be issued only when it is issued from a DTA unit. So be careful where a person has a SEZ unit and DTA unit. You will have to consider the turnover limit of both the units as a whole. But e-invoicing will be applicable only in case of invoices issued from a DTA unit. Whether e-invoice is required where self-invoices is to be raised under RCM. Now there is a provision when I receive a service from a GTA or I receive services from a advocate, I am required to pay the invoice under reverse charge mechanism. So in that context, when I receive such services which are liable under reverse charge mechanism, we are required to raise a self invoice as a documentation, and the contents are prescribed for that also. In such a case, when I am raising a self invoice for the services received under reverse charge mechanism, there is no requirement of a e-invoice reporting. When a supplier is making a taxable supply as well as a exempt supply, please note that you should issue separate invoice which has a IRN for a taxable supply, because there is no requirement for issuing a IRN details for an exempt supply. So it is suggested that you raise separate invoice for taxable supply and separate invoice for exempt supply. And for exempt supply, the requirement is that we have to issue a bill of supply and not a tax invoice. And even in case of supplies which are not liable to GST, which I mentioned, like alcoholic liquor for human consumption, suppose in a restaurant, in a big hotel where they are required to issue invoices, separate invoices for alcoholic liquor for humans consumption, issue a bill of supply, and tax invoice for a taxable supply. How do I disclose other taxable charges like freight, insurance, and other things in the IRP? You can add one more line item separately for this purposes and disclose these items separately in the IRP for generation of the IRN numbers. Now we'll have a particular aspect of how do I disclose certain abatements which is applicable in the case of real estate registered persons, where there is an abatement of 67. Here I have done the rounding off of the numbers, so it is not accurately determined just for the discussion purposes. So where the pre-tax value is 1 crore, abatement is 33,000, taxable value is 67,000. So 33,000 you mention under other charges, GST amount will be 5,000. So total invoice value will come as 1 crore 5 lakhs. So how to disclose this particular abatement? This is the manner in which it has to be prescribed. And even the FAQ issued by the GST and portal gives the same illustration. So as a matter of disclosure, this is how you have to work around for disclosing this particular values. In case the GSTN of the recipient has been deactivated, and if you're trying to raise an invoice, and if it is deactivated, then you'll not be able to issue an e-invoice. So While raising a e-invoice, the GSTN of the supplier and GSTN of the recipient should be active in the GSTN system on the date of issuing of invoice. If the recipient GSTN has been disabled for various reasons, then you will not be able to issue a e-invoice. Or for that matter, the supplier's GSTN has been deactivated for whatever reason, then the supplier will not be able to issue a GSTN. You will have to check what is the reason for that, and then approach the GSTN for getting the issue resolved so that you can issue a e-invoice. Can amendment be made to e-invoices reported in a IRP? Once a invoice IRN has been generated, no amendment is possible. And in case you want to delete that particular GST IRN number which has been done, you will have to do that within 24 hours. After 24 hours, you can't delete that. And in case a EA bill has been issued in connection with this IRN and the EA bill is verified by the officer during transit, then cancellation of IRN also is not permitted. After lapse of 24 hours, IRN generation cannot be deleted. Any change in e-invoice has to be carried out while generating while filing your GSTR1, sorry, while filing your GSTR1, any changes you think has been reported incorrectly in the IRP while generating IRN, those corrections can be made. But any changes which you make, those will be reported to the proper officer. So take abundant precaution while generating a IRP so that you avoid making any changes or corrections. If you have made any errors, then rectify that, not rectify, you have to delete that, cancel that immediately within 24 hours. After 24 hours, you can't do any cancellation. So you have to have a very robust mechanism and ensure that all the members who are generating the e-invoices in the offices, they are appropriately trained so that errors are not made while generating the e-invoice. So it is a requirement even from the owners or the companies to ensure that the staff who generate these e-invoices are appropriately trained so that we avoid any errors on this aspect. Is e-invoice a substitute to a e-way bill? No, e-way bill is a separate document which has to be raised, and e-invoice is a separate document which has to be raised, and both are mandated to be generated separately. And while generating the IRN, the portal provides an option for generation of e-way bill also. So e-way bill, while generating e-invoice, you can generate the e-way bill also, and IRN has to be first generated and then the e-way bill has to be generated. So ensure that wherever EA bill is required, that also has been complied properly. Next aspect is, can entities opt for e-invoicing voluntarily? Currently, no. Only those notified class of persons who are allowed to generate e-invoice can generate e-invoices. And as a matter of caution, ensure that IRN should be generated before issuing of invoices to the recipient or before movement of goods. You should ensure that when your invoices are generated and being sent along with the goods, then the IRN number or the QR code which is there has to be mentioned on the invoice. So you have to generate that before issuing the invoice. Some of the precautions which you need to take. There is a TCS which is required to be made under Income Tax Act. So how do I disclose this particular TCS when I'm generating this IRN number? Currently, the schema is not providing the separate disclosure for the TCS amount which is done under the Income Tax Act. So this you can work around and disclose this under other charges where it does not form part of a taxable value. So in case of TCS, which is a part which is shown on the invoice also, this TCS amount you can show it under other charges which will not be used for computing the taxable value. Some of the checks which you have to do. suppliers, what happens now when I'm generating this e-invoice, auto-populated GSTR1 will be generated to the registered person. But just based on auto-populated data, don't just go and file the return or file the GSTR1. There might be some errors, possible errors. I'm not saying there will be errors. There might be some errors which have been uh, occurred while generating this auto-populated data. Verify whether all the data is correct. If there are any errors, please rectify that by filing the GSTR1. And for that matter, the GST portal will not populate the B2C data because we are issuing e-invoice for B2B only. So B2C also has to be included while uploading GSTR1. So B2B invoices, you verify whether everything is correct, and B2C, you have to include it in the GSTR1, and that has to be uploaded while filing the GSTR1. Now recipient has to verify this on a monthly basis. Now 2B has come into play. What all have been uploaded? If there are any errors or missing data, all these gaps have to be verified by the recipient also. And if there are any issues on the data which has come into the GSTR2B, that will have to be cross-verified with the supplier also, because your input tax credit is at stake. And can I verify the QR code which is issued on the invoice? Yes, there is an app which has been developed by the GSTN portal, NIC portal, where if you go to this particular as a portal, it gives you an option to download the app, QR code app. Once you download this QR code app onto your mobile, if you scan that QR code which is printed on the invoice, it will show whether it is a valid QR code or not. And sorry, a registered person, as a precaution, must download and store the JSON files, as IRP does not keep a record of IRNs. As a precaution, this is suggested. It is not a mandatory thing because IRP is not keeping a record of all the IRNs. This is a precaution and checks which a registered person issuing e-invoice has to do this particular checks and balances. And there are various links which have been provided in the portal how to generate. There are tutorials also provided on the GST portal. So this is a sorry. So if you log into the GST e-invoice portal, you will be able to gather some information and FAQs also on the aspect of e-invoice. So with this area of coverage on the aspect of when the e-invoice is applicable, who are exempted, what are the precautions to be taken while issuing a e-invoice, I conclude my session on this aspect. Now I hand over the session to Rupa, who can then hand over the session to Sonal Jain, who will take aspects on the procedural issues. Rupa, now over to you. We will take up the FAQs once Sonal Jain covers her topic on the procedural aspects. Mukesh and Rupa, over to you.
Thank you very much, CA Siddheshwar sir. It was really a very good session, enlightening and touching upon every aspect of the legal aspect of the invoice. Now the session will be driven by Sonal Jain with regard to the technical aspect of the e-invoice. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Mukesh ji, for warm welcome. And it was very enlightening session, Siddheshwar ji. So, friends, I'll be taking on the technical aspect and the how you can have a proper system or you can be prepared for e-invoicing. Like as we are aware that the ambit of e-invoicing is increasing day by day. Now, every SSE having aggregate turnover about 20 crore would be requiring to have the e-invoice. So my purpose of today's session would be I'll be letting you the various systems or various technology available in the market which you can adopt and you can simplify your e-invoicing process. By this, as a business entrepreneur, or by this, you as a consultant or you as a business entity can inculcate the technology in your entity and make the e-invoice more simpler, faster, so that you can focus on the core business. So I'll be sharing my presentation.
If Siddheshwar sir is okay, we can take up certain legal questions which we have received.
Okay, Mukesh, you can go. Mukesh sir, you can go ahead.
Yeah. The first question which has come is, what is the time limit of generating an e-invoice, whether it is for export or domestic? Is there any time limit?
See, when we have to issue an invoice for movement of goods, it has to be issued before or at the time of movement of goods, and in case of services, after providing the services, right? So an invoice which has to be issued has to have an IRN. So if you are going to issue an invoice, you have to generate the IRN first and then get embedded that with QR code in the invoice. So there is no time limit prescribed as such. Before issuing that e-invoice, you have to generate that IRN. See, the misconception which has been going around is e-invoice is an invoice generated from the portal. I think we have to come out of that thing saying that portal is not generating invoice. It is only generating the QR code with the IRN. So you generate that, put it in the invoice, and then issue that. So as such, time limit is not there.
What is your view on a cancellation of an e-invoice? Will there be any complication?
Cancellation of an e-invoice in the sense if you cancel that IRN within 24 hours, that will be reported. And whatever details have been issued earlier, those will be captured. And once you cancel that, again that will get reported in the portal. You should have adequate reasoning as to why you have cancelled this particular invoice. Tomorrow there will be questions raised during the audit by the department. What was the reason for that? So you have a backup. Say that while raising that there were certain errors which the person raising invoice has done. He had mentioned the wrong tax value, or he had not generated it properly. So based on that, you keep the backup documents so that you substantiate what was the reason for cancellation. Impact as such, if you have a valid reason for that, I think you should not fear for that. You only have to substantiate it.
Right, sir. As this is an e-enabled environment, there will be definitely an audit trail. So someone
Yes.
will be looking at the audit trail.
Yes.
One more question is whether for movement of goods, e-way bill is required, but for taxable supply only e-invoice is required. So whether for delivery challan, when the movement is under a delivery challan, will there be IRN requirement?
Delivery challan does not require a IRN because it is not an e-invoice. So as regards to e-way bill, as I mentioned, e-way bill is a separate document which has to be, wherever it is mandatorily required, you have to raise the e-way bill, and where e-invoice is required, you have to. So both documents have to go hand in hand.
Okay. One more question is, the entity is only having an exempted turnover. There is no taxable supply, but the turnover is aggregate turnover is more than 20 crores. In case they make a scrap sale or a sale of an asset, are they required to generate e-invoice for the particular supplies?
You mean the turnover is more than 20 crores? He is
Yes.
He is making only exempt supplies. As a stray supply, he is making a scrap sale or a sale of an asset, right?
Yes, sir.
If you are making a B2B supply of that scrap sale or sale of asset, you will have to generate that e-invoice for that particular transaction. Whenever you are making a B2B and it is a taxable supply, you have to generate that e-invoice.
Right, sir. Okay. Now, one more question is, in case of many service companies, the cost plus model and all, we see that the invoices are raised in the subsequent week after the end of the month, like say 31st of March. The invoice will be raised based on the timesheets received from the employees and all, say in the first week or second week of the April. Now, can the entity raise an invoice in the system dated 31st of March, but reported on IRN in the subsequent period, what will be the implication?
Invoice has been raised as of 31st March dated. Now IRN you're
Dated.
going to generate that. If you generate that IRN before filing of your GSTR1 and you capture that IRN also on the invoice, should not be an issue. As a suggestion, you generate the IRN before raising an invoice, but due to these practical difficulties, if you raise the IRN on the say the 31st March invoice, you are going to raise an IRN in the month of April. You ensure that IRN is raised before filing of your GSTRN so that there will be no mismatches between your GSTR1, the reporting in IRN, as well as the 3B reporting. So that reconciliations are intact. Otherwise, there will be a lot of explanations to be provided.
Correct. Right. One more question is it mandatory to have a automatic series, system generated automatic invoice series, or even a manual series can be followed by a registered person?
Manual or automated invoice numbers, right?
Right.
Invoice number is a separate number which has to be issued in terms of Rule 46. IRN number is a separate thing. IRN number is a separate number by itself. You can generate the invoice number which is required to be mentioned in the invoice in terms of 46. It can be auto-generated or a manual number, but ensure that the numbers are intact and you have a control on that. In case there are any jump in the numbers, suppose you are going to issue invoices manually, say series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Suddenly there is a jump in the invoice number after 6. The person issuing the invoice makes a jump and issues invoice number 8. Then in your invoice reporting, there will be a jump, there will be questions raised. So you keep an explanation ready for wherever there are jump in invoice numbers. Or for that matter also, when you're generating these invoices electronically, there might be some issues in the software where it will cancel the invoice because of some reason. So it doesn't mean that I've made some what you say a blunder in that. Keep a backup document in that. There is no harm either automatic or manual.
Right. So automatic or manual, consecutive serial number one has to ensure that he follows that.
Yes.
Yeah, one more invoice. One more question is whether aggregate turnover includes a transaction in securities and mutual funds for any person.
A very good question. If you go to the meaning of definition of goods, goods excludes securities. That is your shares and mutual funds. And even if you go to the definition of service, it excludes against securities. So as such, if you go to the meaning, when is e-invoicing applicable? It is applicable in case of supplies made. Okay, so when the definition of goods excludes securities, and even the service excludes securities, then and it is excluded from the meaning of supply. In my view, the turnover, even if you go to the meaning of aggregate turnover, it uses the word taxable supplies, exempt supplies. So when the word security is not getting covered in the ambit of a supply as goods or services, in my view, it should not be considered for determining the turnover of 20 crores. But one word of caution here is another aspect will kick in where you're doing a business and also dealing in shares and mutual funds, and there is a purchase and sale. When the sale is done, you have to keep your eyes open for reversal of common ITC in terms of Rule 42, because in the below explain after Rule 46, there is an explanation provided in the rules saying that exempted supply includes transaction in securities also. Only for the limited purposes of reversal of a common ITC, the turnover has to be considered. But for the purpose of e-invoice, this turnover should not be considered.
All right, sir. There is one question from a participant. A small taxpayer who generates e-invoice from a portal through Excel utility, but he cannot include IRN or QR code on his tax invoice as his system cannot be modified. Can he keep both the copies with him to show the compliance?
See, QR code is a mandatory requirement in my view, so it has to be embedded on the invoice. So you have to find a mechanism to include that on the tax invoice. Because
Right.
end of the day,
So
when the person has to claim ITC, his input tax credit is at stake.
all right. So it is not possible that you generate one system generated invoice and then attach IRN received from the portal and send both this. Technically
You can
speaking, Rule
mention the
46 content.
because Rule 46 mentions QR code as a mandatory thing.
Okay. So it must be on the invoice itself.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Sonal, CA Sonal Jain, if you are ready, maybe.
Yes, yes. Sorry for the technical glitch, and we can proceed with Rupa ma'am is just sharing the presentation. Anyways, so basically speaking, as we have discussed about all the legal aspect of the e-invoice, I would say that when we are practically implementing e-invoice, now it is mandate for assessee who are under the ambit of turnover exceeding 20 crore to prepare invoice. So as a consultant or as an advisor, we would suggest that there can be three options. First is you should have any GST Suvidha provider. May it a ClearTax, may it is Gen GST. There are so many GST Suvidha provider available. If you are not having those GST Suvidha provider, the alternate option is to integrate your existing ERP. So integrating your existing ERP means you might be using n number of softwares, maybe Tally ERP, Tally Prime, or Zoho, and SAP. There are so many ERPs available. So most of the ERPs have already given facility of enabling e-invoicing from the software itself. So talking about Tally Prime, I have taken in my presentation Tally Prime as one of the product for e-invoice, as majority of mid-size entities are using Tally Prime. So from Tally Prime, at one click, you can generate the e-invoice. What you just need to do, you just need to add Tally as your application service provider on the e-invoice portal. So this we will see that how we can add Tally as our ASP application service provider for getting e-invoice generated at one click from Tally. Now, third important thing is that there are many assessors who don't have either GSP or who don't even have the ERP which is having inculcation with any ASP or any application service provider. Then for that, government has came up with Zeppon app. So this Zeppon app is the tool through which it is just Excel based tool. So you just need to have a MS Excel in your laptop. Based on that Excel based tool, you can generate e-invoice in a very simple and easy process. So we'll be seeing all these three things in our presentation. The other important thing, like why we need to be technology prone for e-invoice, the reason being is that as Siddeshwar sir said that the objective of e-invoice is to slowly and gradually bring each entity under this domain. By this, government want to make everything through system. So this is something through which everything will be harmonized and everything will be real time. So if you are having a system in build right from the day one, it will make your GST assessment as well as providing information in various return. Moreover, in your annual return also, it becomes easier to make a reconciliation. The objective of e-invoice is to ensure that entire sales data is available with the government on real time basis, because though currently there is no specific timeline that e-invoice should be generated on the same time, but as Siddeshwar sir said that slowly and gradually it will take the Indian economy to a real time mode wherein each invoice will be uploaded at the time the transaction is executed. Right now we see that many of the assessee are generating invoices at the later date, but that is as it is a trial base and as it is the initial phase. But soon the objective is to make the things real time. So you as a company or you as a business entity need to have a inbuilt team wherein your accountants or your administrative team is trained in such a manner that there is no delay or there is no error in generating the e-invoice. So if you are having Tally as your system, uh, it is just a two-step process to integrate the e-invoice in the Tally. The first thing which you need to do is to go to GSTN website. There you can see basically I actually wanted to show you everything through navigation, but there is some technical glitch due to which I am not able to share the presentation. And Rupa ma'am is trying to share it, but meanwhile, I'll just verbally explain that how the system flows. So Rupa ma'am, can you share the presentation?
Ma'am, this is Purshot.
Okay.
I'm already shared the screen, ma'am. I hope you guys see the presentation.
Okay, there is some issue. I am not able to see that part. I'm extremely sorry for that part, but
But the presentation is live on the system.
Thank you.
okay.
Ma'am, I'm on the first slide. Tech expert for e-invoicing under GST.
Okay, but anyways, move to later part, the second slide. There you will be able to see.
Session overview.
Uh,
Auto e-invoicing. Yeah, go ahead.
Mukesh, you can mention which slide is being told so that she can refer parallelly and then.
Yeah, I do that. I do that.
okay, fine, I
Otherwise,
got it.
you log for
So,
10 minutes.
ma'am, Siddheshwar ji, sorry, Mukesh ji, you can move
Yes.
to the third slide. I got how we can work it.
Website for generating e-invoices, third slide here.
So on that website, you can see uh, if you want to have a new registration, there is option for new registration. There you need to put your GSTN number, and based on the OTP, you will get the new login password. So if you are going through the manual mode, you can generate the e-invoice directly from the website. For that, you just need to download a tool called Zepon tool. Just come to fourth slide. The third slide, I've just kept the URL. Now on fourth slide, it is a menu of the e-invoice website of the portal. It has a menu called help. On this help menu, you will get the this app called Zepon app. Through this, you will download one utility called Excel utility. And this Excel utility is as simple as just fetching the invoice detail. Like you need to put all invoice detail. Now, e-invoice contains detail related to sales invoice. Basically, it is nothing but a replication of sales invoice with the unique IRF number. So you need to put all HSN, product name, product quantity, selling price, and you need to put the recipient detail, recipient GSTN. And based on that detail, this Zapon app will generate a JSON file. This JSON file need to be uploaded on the e-invoice portal. So if you are new to e-invoice, you need to first create a e-invoice registration. Sir, come to fifth slide. In that, I have kept the link of e-invoice registration. Now come to sixth slide. Sixth slide is a dashboard of e-invoice login. So on 6th slide, you can see that e-invoice portal gives you the facility of a database that how many invoices are generated, and in the first menu of e-invoice, once you click that, you will have an option to upload all invoice. So the e-invoice portal support only one format, that is JSON file. So currently if you are using any of the system, you need to ensure that you need to get the invoice detail first in the JSON file. This JSON file is to be uploaded on the government e-invoice portal. So this Zepon tool also help you in getting the JSON file generated. But at the end, this JSON file is again to be uploaded on the e-invoice portal. Sir, come to 7th slide. In that, you can see that how the uploaded e-invoice looks like. Like we can trace the generated e-invoice data based on the e-invoice website. So I have covered a period of say 3 days, and it will show me the generated e-invoice details. Now come to 8th slide, GST portal. Here I have kept the snapshot of e-invoice portal. It gives you various facility of search facility. So if you are taking up the technology aspect of e-invoice, many times you need to verify your signed e-invoice. Then there is an option of verifying signed invoice. You can search the HSN code of product and services through this option. And the last option is quite interesting. It is telling that GST and generating IRNs. This means this is the list of Excel covering more than 1,50,000 assessee, and this 1,50,000 assessee are the assessee who are under the e-invoice system. So if anyone wants a database that how many clients are under e-invoice, the government has came up with option wherein they give an Excel template stating that these are the clients under e-invoicing. So basically this database is helpful to many of the assessee who want to ensure that I want to do business only with those assessee who are uploading their details on real-time basis. Like many a time we used to see in GST, and that earlier many of the vendors were telling that I will trade with only those assessee who are under monthly GST and embed. So later on, government came up with IFF, wherein even the quarterly can upload the invoice on monthly basis. So this list is again an enabler for those assessee who want to be 100% sure that my supplier is compliant in e-invoice. And if you as a buyer want to ensure that whether my supplier is under the e-invoice regime or not, you can get the name of that supplier from the e-invoice website. It is as simple as that. Just go to e-invoice portal, just click on search button, and there is last menu called GST and generating IRN. This system even gives you facility to search the GST Suvidha providers. It even gives you facility to calculate the distance for putting under a e-way bill, and it even gives you facility of e-invoice status of the taxpayer. So this is interesting menu. If you are a client under e-invoice, to check this entire menu, it will give you many other important information. Sir, come to 9th slide. Okay, sir, am I synced with the presentation? I'm extremely sorry, but I'm not able to see the presentation. I'm just speaking my manner.
No issues, ma'am. No, we are on the same page.
Okay, so just come to 9th slide. Here I have covered the Zepon tool. So basically, friends, any assessee who are having very limited invoice, I don't suggest that you should integrate your ERP, or you should spend money for integration of ERP, or take the service of GST Suvidha provider, because any GST Suvidha provider will be charging around 15 to 20,000. Then in that case, in case of limited invoice, you can download this Zepon tool, very simple Excel tool. On a one click, generate the invoice. So we will see this demonstration of Zepon tool. Sir, I have shared one video file. Can you just open that file? It's just a 6-minute video explaining how you can generate e-invoice from this Zepman tool.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Please wait.
Welcome to
Sir, my screens are visible. Can I play the video, sir?
Yes, you can now.
Yeah, sure.
GEPP, GST e-Invoice Preparing and Printing Tool. This is a user-friendly form-based tool to enter the invoices one by one and generate the IRN numbers. This tool may be downloaded from bulk generation tools in e-Invoice portal. You need to have MS Office installed on your system. Please make sure you are using 2010 or higher version of MS Office. The main menu lists the options available in the tool. New invoice. In this option you can enter the details of all invoices one by one. Pending invoices. This contains all the invoices for which IRNs have not been generated. Import QR code. The QR code file generated can be imported and updated using this option. Print e-invoice. This option may be used to print the e-invoice along with QR code. Generated e-invoices. This contains all the e-invoices for which IRNs have been generated so far and acts like a repository of all IRNs. Payment details. This option can be used to update the payment details for the invoices, including for which IRNs have been generated. Search. This option is used to search e-invoices based on certain criteria. Master menu consists of options to update the seller profile, recipient information and product information. Please note that it is mandatory to first update the seller details, recipient and product master before entering the invoices. Seller profile. This is a one-time entry form for entering the seller details. Information entered here will be used in place of supplier details during the preparation of JSON file. You may also upload your business logo which will be printed on the invoice. Recipient master. You may enter the details of your clients using this option. Details of the recipients such as GSTN, trade name and address details may be entered using this option. This master will help you in quickly entering the purchaser details in the invoice entry form. Product master. You may enter the details of your product using this option. Details of the product such as HSN code, description, units, price and tax rates can be entered. This master will help you in quickly entering the product details in the invoice entry form. New invoice. This is the main form and is used to enter the invoice details. Keep the invoice ready before you enter the details. Select the category such as B2B, SES or exports. Next, select the document type and enter the details such as number and date. Next, enter the bill to details. You can enter first 3 characters of the purchaser name and the list is shown. Now select the purchaser, the other details are auto-populated. Transaction type can be selected as regular, bill from dispatch from, bill to ship to, combination. The details may be entered accordingly. Next, enter the serial number and product details in the product name. Enter the first 3 letters and the list is displayed from the product master. Select the product and other details like description, HSN code, unit, tax rate etc. are auto-filled from the master. You can add multiple products by clicking on Add New Product button. You can also enter the payment details for which the balance amount will be calculated automatically. Next, enter the e-way bill details, if required. Now, click on Submit to see the preview of e-invoice. You may confirm the entry or edit if required. On confirmation, the invoice details are available in the pending invoices. You may complete entering all the invoices. A maximum of 10 invoices can be entered and kept pending for IRN generation. Next, click on Pending Invoices. pending invoices. This contains the invoices for which IRNs have not been generated. There can be only 10 invoices kept pending. Click on Validate to validate the data and click on Prepare JSON. The JSON file will be generated in the same folder where the tool is copied. If any errors are identified, correct the errors and revalidate it. The JSON file prepared will contain all the invoice details. The JSON file thus generated shall be uploaded in the e-invoice portal.
Okay, fine.
Now, log into the e-invoice
I think so. The video is again getting repeated. So friends,
and
based on
select the option Bulk Upload. Upload the
Shakun, you
IRN.
can stop the video
Huh.
and go
So
to the
friends, based
presentation.
on the video, you must have got an idea that this was just an Excel template through which entire navigation was done. So on the Excel template, there are various menu buttons, and you can add invoice, you can get that Excel validated, generate the JSON. And this JSON is again uploaded on the e-invoice portal, that is government portal. So this Excel template or Zeppon app is for those who don't have any ERP through which JSON is automatically generated, or their ERP is not getting a facility, is not having a facility of generating a JSON, or who are still under manual invoicing. So for those who are under manual invoicing or who are not having ERP, for that the Zeppon app is a nice facility, and this Zeppon app is a desktop based tool. It also have a facility of generating e-invoice through mobile application. It supports Android phones, and it also have a facility of generating e-invoice through its portal. So you can try this government based Zeppon app. And there is one question from Manjesh sir, that how to capture the LUT details in Zeppon app. So sir, basically as it is a Excel based, it doesn't have any field of entering the LUT number. So for example, if I'm generating an export invoice with against the LUT from Tally, I have that field of writing the LUT number and selecting that whether it is supply with payment or without payment. And then when I'm generating invoice from Tally, that invoice has the QR code, has IRN number, and has LUT details. But from this, that facility is not as of now present. So in case you are having this type of transaction, I would advise that either move to any of the small ERP, or you can even move to Tally. And in case you don't want to do that, along with your invoice from Zeppon app, you need to keep one more covering invoice containing the LUT details. There is one question from Vikas ji. There is another option to use bulk Excel utility under bulk IRN generation. Can this also be used for small taxpayer? This also can be used, but the Zeppon app is also not a specific different application. It is also a desktop based tool, and rather than tool, I will say that it is just an Excel utility. So you can download this utility, enter the details, upload this in the bulk iron. Also you can generate up to 10 irons. So just come to presentation part. Now in presentation I have actually covered one more aspect, that is generating e-invoice, e-way bill from Tally. So I don't know whether with
Which
Mukesh
page is
sir,
it, ma'am?
just a second. It is on the we are on the 12th slide, e-way bill, then come to 13, rather I would say directly come to 16. So basically friends, in this presentation I have even covered the aspect wherein assessee is having both e-invoice and e-way bill, and how to automate both things parallelly. So in both your logins, like in e-way bill login as well as your okay, there is one question from Anna Durai sir, that how to done e-invoice from the Tally. So sir, for generating e-invoice from the Tally, or for generating e-way bill from the Tally, the registration process is same, like in both the login of the government, that is e-invoice login and e-way bill login. You need to first add your Tally as your application Suvidha provider. So how to add Tally as your application Suvidha provider? For that, I have covered that part in the presentation. Mukesh sir, just come to slide number 16. It again has a complete demonstration of adding this.
Yes,
There
yes.
are 3
Yeah,
requests.
that video is running. That video
Okay.
is running.
So basically, if you see in the video, it will take you to NIC portal of e-way bill, and there you need to select Tally as your application Suvidha provider. First, you have to be validating your mobile number, email ID. You need to add the OTP, and once login get created, you need to add Tally as your application Suvidha provider. Friends, if you see the video, this is a process of just 5 minutes. But by doing this process of 5 minutes from your Tally itself, you can get your e-invoice and e-way bill done in 1 second. No need to generate JSON from Tally, log into the e-invoice portal or log into the e-way bill portal and upload this JSON. So entire time saving of this generation of JSON and uploading on the portal gets saved, as Tally is by default interlinked with the GST and websites. So by this integration with your sales invoice itself, both the e-invoice as well as e-way bill get prepared. You don't need to do anything additional. You just need to enter the login password of both this domain, e-invoice as well as e-way bill, in your Tally.
But I think the video is has reached its end.
Okay, so in the video, hope you have seen that how Tally India Private Limited is added as application service provider, and the portal gives you with the user ID and password. Like once we generate that user ID and password of application Suvidha provider, this user ID and password we need to add in our Tally. So once we add that in our Tally, we can generate the e-invoice from the Tally itself. Now, sir, I would request if you can come to slide number 16. This slide number 16 is telling how to generate e-invoice from Tally. Sorry, rather slide number 16 was, come to slide number 16. Slide number 16 right now we saw. Come to slide number 19. Have you started that video, slide number 19?
Yes. Yes.
So if you see in slide number 19, this is nothing but we are generating a sales invoice and we are adding all the details. We need to add all the details which we actually enter while preparing the e-way bill, like truck number, lorry number, distance and everything. Then you simply need to add the login password of e-way bill portal that we saw how to generate. Once you add that, Tally will automatically communicate with the government portal. No need to do any manual exercise of generating JSON and uploading on the portal. It is by default done by Tally, and your e-way bill gets generated. You can see that QR code, everything is generated. Now this was for the e-way bill. Same thing is applicable for e-invoice. Now we'll see that how it is applicable for invoice. So sir, I would request you come to slide number 21.
The video we have to stop just in between and go to slide number 21.
No, yeah, just if video is not over, let them see. I thought it is over because I was also. See, in the video at the end, the invoice with QR code is generated, right?
No, that has still not come yet.
Okay. I don't know what is the glitch, but I'm not able to see the screen.
Maybe you can just once log out and log in from the system. Yeah, we can see the invoice now.
Okay.
Yeah, the QR code appears there.
Okay. So now just move to slide number 21. This is for the assessee having both e-way bill as well as the invoice.
Ma'am, with your permission, can I play the video? I'm in the
Please.
21st slide. Yeah. I hope all are see the video.
Yes. So in this video, the second video, you can see that both e-invoice and e-way bill are generated in together. So here, Tally is automatically communicating with the e-way bill portal and e-invoice portal. We just need to add the login password of the both the place.
Is the video running? I think the screen is freezed.
Actually, I am not able to see what's going on the screen. Anyways, friends, the objective of video is to show you that through Tally, if you do the basic level of configurations of enabling the e-way bill and enabling the invoicing, and correspondingly, these configurations are enabled in your e-invoice portal and in your e-way bill portal, your e-invoice and e-way bill get automatically fetched at department and you don't need to do any manual exercise. And the alternate option which is available with you, so if you are not having any ASP or GSP or any ERP, you can go to Zepon tool. The demonstration of Zepon tool we saw in that video, and if you are trying the Zepon tool or if you are having any issue in integrating your ERP with e-invoice portal or e-way bill portal, or if you are having any issue while generating e-invoice through any GST Suvidha provider, in that case, you can any day contact us for the query, like for query, we will come to you and we'll give you the solution. I'm extremely sorry for today's this technical glitch. Like I prepared myself 200% to make this session perfectly, but I'm not able to share the screen. There is some bug or don't know.
So ma'am, after 21st slide, is there anything like, or we can just take the question answer because now we are
So we
almost at
can
the end of
take
the
the
session.
question answers. We can take the question answers. So on the 38th slide, I have kept the question answers. Or we can take the other question answers also. On 38th slide, there are 4 questions related.
You can continue with your process. 38 slide, I'll just open. We'll open. 38 slide. Yeah. Can we prepare e-invoice manually?
So for this, the answer is as such, manual option is not there, but you can try from this Zepon tool. It is a Excel-based utility for generating the e-invoice.
All right. The second question is, can we add LUT number in e-invoice generated from?
As discussed, you cannot add annual LUT number in Zepon tool itself as there is no field available. But what you can do, you can have one more covering or additional supplement to your e-invoice stating the LUT number, or else you need to do prepare e-invoice through some ASP or through some GSP.
One more question is, if we are raising e-invoice and portal is not allowing to raise, then what to do?
Okay, in that scenario, there can be 2 errors. One is Either portal is having downtime. In case when portal is having downtime, it shows on the portal itself that currently portal is under maintenance. In that scenario, you cannot do anything. The alternative thing is that there might be some field error, like e-invoice has the field of HSN number, service accounting code, quantity detail, price detail, recipient detail, place of supply detail. If these details are missing, there are chances that your e-invoice will not get generated and will not be generated properly. So you need to ensure that these fields are filled properly, and in case anything is missing, you can check that in the error file, because if you are uploading the JSON file and if e-invoice is not getting generated, it will show you with the error file in the JSON file. So through that error file, you can trace that where is the error, and you can resolve that error. Then after you can generate the invoice.
One more
Okay.
question is, we are service providers and the invoice is prepared based on timesheet within 1 week after the end of the month. The invoice will be having month and date. What to do in such cases?
Okay, in that case, generally as a service sector also, I would suggest that now you should move to real-time invoicing, like on the month end itself, based on the timesheet, prepare the invoice. But what is the practical scenario? The figure of the invoice is derived in the first week itself. So in that scenario, currently there is no penalty on raising the e-invoice on a backdated basis, like your invoice as well as e-invoice are generated on a backdated basis. But soon as objective of government is to move to real time basis, it is advised to move to more on real time basis.
All right, ma'am. Now I think
Any
the
other
4
question?
questions which you have mentioned on the slide are over.
Right.
One
Of course.
question I would like to ask here. You mentioned that from Tally Prime, e-invoice
Right.
can be generated and it fetches the QR code and shows in the invoice itself.
Right.
As I have seen, one of the mandate is that IRN must be linked with your invoice. So does
Right.
Tally maintain a record of tagging our invoice with the IRN?
Yes, sir. So basically, if you see, if you see those videos in my presentation, it was even showing that once my invoice is generated, then again when I print my sales invoice, that sales invoice will be having that IRN. So Tally has a facility of capturing the IRN at that moment itself. So at a later date, whenever you fetch the you open that invoice, it will be having IRN date, and even when you print, it will be having the IRN date. IRN details. And again,
So Tally, please
basically,
continue. Sorry.
right. So in Tally, the IRN get fetched in the sales invoice itself, and at the same moment, like as soon as I click that I want to generate the invoice, once that data goes to the invoice portal, the details get fetched in my sales invoice. And one more
What do you
thing,
suggest? Yeah. What
right.
do you suggest for those who are not using Tally but using Japan tool? They also get the IRN number and QR code separately. So how do they link the IRN with the
Right.
manually or automatically generated invoice?
So for them also, Zeppon tool itself has a facility of fetching the IRN. Zeppon tool, the third menu is giving facility of fetching the IRN.
Okay.
So once you get the IRN fetched, and then after you take the printout of invoice from Zeppon tool, the invoice will be having the IRN detail. I would even make one suggestion from the technology angle, like when Siddeshwar sir said that you should have a details of IRN with you, as portal is not keeping complete record, portal is keeping a record only of 3 days. In that scenario, I have one more suggestion that whenever there is a GST assessment, departments ask for a reconciliation of e-way bill with sales invoice, because there are many a times chances that assessee has raised a sales invoice and later on there are some correction, or many a time e-way bill has been generated and sales invoice is differing from e-way bill. In that scenario, now the biggest reconciliation in the assessment would be e-invoice versus e-way bill versus sales invoice, because in last 4 years somewhere the 2A and 2B part is getting streamlined, as now department has mended 2B as a mandatory field for ITC. So now most of the assessee are very clear from their mind that I don't want to take any ITC beyond 2B. So now the another area of reconciliation is e-way bill versus sales invoice versus e-invoicing. In that scenario, if you are having those ERP which are giving you inbuilt reconciliation, it will save lots of your time. Because many a time we see that after generating sales invoice, we realize that there was some error. And these errors are rectified in GSTR 1. So as Siddeshwar sir said that this information goes to GST and officer. So many a time, many of the assessee are raising a notice that why there is a difference. There can be n number of reasons, punching error, or there can be deviation in the buyer name, recipient name. So you should have that level of technology wherein your reason of differences are documented at that moment. And Tally gives you facility of tracing the differences. Like it has a menu wherein you will get an information that details of sales invoice as per your books of account, details of sales invoice as per e-way bill, and details of sales invoice as per e-invoicing. So as a owner, you are at a peace of mind that yes, this number of invoices are perfectly clear, and for this 3-4 invoices, I need to maintain a reason and I need to document in my file. So from the technological aspect, I would suggest that as a company, you should have a discipline from day one to maintain a documentation for difference for any difference between these three things. And if in case the difference is quite high or difference is quite suspicious, you should communicate to GST and department from day one. Like there was an error and this error, this is how we have rectified. So this is from the technology aspect. I am very sorry. I have actually prepared a demonstration in live Tally software, but unable to share. In case we can take a second session for a practical aspect, but bear me for this technical clinch today.
Definitely, ma'am. We will look into it when we can have one more session from you, live session.
Like that
Any questions from the participants?
Live session.
Sure, sure. Any question from any other participant? I think there is no question.
Okay, I have just one suggestion for all the participants that just move to the technological aspect for generating e-invoice and prepare a system right from the day one rather than thinking that let's generate 2 months in a simple manner, then we'll come up with the system. If the system is in place right from day one, it will simplify your process at a later date.
Agreed, ma'am. Agreed. Every registered person should be vigilant enough, and they should
Right.
proactively set up a process of compliance as well as maintain a very good track record of checking the invoices on a regular basis and do a health checkup on a regular basis so that there are not errors. And as we know that internet never forgets. Once the data
Right.
is sitting on the GSTN portal, it is definitely not possible for us to go and modify it. So if you modify also, there is an audit trail, and someone
Right.
definitely will be looking into it in future. Thank
Right.
you very much for the session, ma'am and Siddeshwar sir. There are few questions. There were few questions. I think all of the questions are resolved. Unless any of the participant has any question, we would like to give vote of thanks to the eminent speakers and then proceed. Rupa ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mukesh. On behalf of the chamber, we express our sincere thanks to Mr. Siddeshwar Ilmali and Ms. Sonal Jain for having addressed on this important subject, sir. We look forward to have many more sessions with you both, sir. Thank you very much once again.
One request. There are participants asking for presentation, so might be we should request both of the speakers to share the presentation.
Sure.
Sure, we'll share that to BCIC. They can share it later.
Yes, sir. We will share it to the participants, sir.
All right,
Thank
all
you,
right.
BCIC, for this opportunity.
Thank you, BCIC, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much to both of you, and thank you to all participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the participants.